Yes!
Yes, we're live! Okay, welcome to Dive into World Building. It's like a whole party today, but we had some trouble getting our special guest in, so at last she's in and we're on our way. Our guest today is somebody who has been here as a discussant before, Pat MacEwen. Welcome, Pat.
Hi.
Yeah, of course, you know, as with many people, I am thoroughly convinced that all of my discussants are incredibly awesome, and I could feature any or all of them at any given time on the show, and it would be awesome. It is certainly the case with Pat. So if you guys, the rest of you, have hidden superpowers that you're not telling me about, totally tell me about them later. But you know, for now, we're gonna feature Pat because she's great. So Pat is awesome. She has a new story out in fantasy and science fiction magazine, F&SF, called Coyote Song, and she's also an expert in anthropology and forensics, which is pretty amazing. And man, your life story, Pat, that would make a book in and of itself, I think.
They say it's an advantage to writers to have a checkered career. That is my definition of, oh, I must be normal for something then. But it wasn't planned that way. I was originally going to be Jacques-Yvette Cousteau.
Oh, wow.
But things happen. You go where you have to go. You do what you have to do sometimes. That was why my first degree was in marine biology, and eventually I wound up in anthropology. But then I found out, these people are my tribe. They're just like science fiction fans. They're interested in all sorts of things. They're kind of misfits in mundane life, and they've decided to pursue their passions, so it all works out.
Interesting. Yeah, you know, I think part of what makes anthropologists seem like misfits is that they are taking a step back and analyzing a system that they are part of, so it becomes easier to do that if you were not entirely part of the system in the first place, or you felt like you didn't belong in some way. So
I think they both indulge in a taste for the other.
yes.
And then forensics, well, forensics is like any other science. First you have to learn to see what's there, then you have to figure out how it got that way, and then you have to look for a way to either prove it or disprove it.
Anthropologists seem like misfits is that they are taking a step back and analyzing a system that
Now we have echo, yay.
it's easier to do that if you're not entirely part of the system in the first place.
It's just Google's time travel experiment. Don't worry about it.
Well,
They're experimenting with everything else.
A taste for the other.
yeah. So okay. So usually, what causes echo is
Forensics
somebody's
science. First you have to learn to see
computer
what's there,
providing feedback.
and you have to figure out how it got that way.
So
You have to look for a way to either prove it or disprove it.
anthropologists seem like misfits is it's not going to be Morgan or Kimberly because they're on headphones.
Do I have a headphone talk? I think it's me.
Sally, can you mute your
Yeah.
computer for a second?
I'm looking for the,
Well,
They're experimenting with everything else.
Taste for the other.
there, I've muted Sally. Let's see if that changes the equation a little bit.
Well,
Wow.
technology will work just fine until the moment you need it, and then all of a sudden.
Demoitis.
Yeah, okay, so
Sally's muted on her end, so.
so if you can bring up the chat bar so that we can make sure to keep her hooked in, even if it's been causing trouble. All right, so so you said learn what's there, figure out how it got that way, and then prove it.
Yeah, that's.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on what that means?
Well, when you're dealing with crime scenes, the first thing you have to learn is how to see what's there.
Mhm.
Because a lot of stuff in our processing system won't go through if we're not expecting to see it in the first place.
Mm.
You look at an alien here, you look at a crime scene, it's the same thing. If you don't have that in your brain in the first place, it takes you a while to set it up.
Yeah.
You have to train your eye, even if you're looking for really simple things like shell casings in the grass. One of the things you'll do is you'll throw one down, and then train your eye on it, and it makes it so much easier to find all the rest of them.
Huh.
That's a great trick. I'm using that for Legos. Legos in my carpet.
That's
and
interesting.
Of course, are always distorted when you're looking at a crime scene, so you have to try and figure out what was normal at some point. And with some people, never was. Back to birth sometimes. You wind up dealing with such a variety of people, and you begin to wonder what the hell normal ever meant.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you get to see people on the worst day of their lives, and occasionally on the best days. You know?
Yeah.
A lot of murder scenes, but I also get to be there sometimes when the little kid gets found that's gone missing.
Nice.
You know, the grandma with Alzheimer's. And once in a while you get to be there when, ordinary stuff. Christmas time, my department always has the cops go around with bags of toys for the kids. They let us hand out some of them, too, for the CSI side, so that kind of stuff can be a lot of fun.
Cool. So you're still working with the police, are you?
No, I haven't done that for quite a while. Mostly now I work on archaeological sites. Thinking about going back overseas, but we'll see how that works out. There's a bunch of mass graves in the northern part of Iraq where the Yazidis are standing guard. And if things ever cool down enough, there's a plan afoot to go up there and do something with that. And I personally...
In northern Iraq, you said?
Yeah. I was set up to go the last time they were working on graves there, but my mother got so sick that I was afraid to leave.
Right.
And of course she eventually passed away at the end of that spiral, so that's not a concern anymore. There's still that 130-degree heat thing.
Yeah, that would make things tough.
And of course I really don't like getting shot at, so I'm going to think really hard about that one.
Yeah, I can imagine.
There's Zimbabwe. I think that's probably going to blow up sometime this year.
There's what there?
Zimbabwe is suffering the same severe droughts as other parts of Africa and South America. They've declared themselves in a state of emergency, which for Zimbabwe is really saying something, because they haven't been allowed to print their own money for several years now. They use American currency because no one will sell them the paper to print their own money.
Wow.
Inflation hit like 3 million%, which is kind of that point where you get into genocidal situations. That's what happened in Germany right before World War II really took hold, and it's what happened in the Balkans right before the ethnic cleansing really got going.
Wow. That's interesting.
It's one of the reasons I'm interested in your stuff, because you pay attention to economics.
Economics is pretty critical.
But economics is kind of at the basis of most of the violence that goes on in this world.
Yeah, a lot of it, yeah.
Well, the big violence. The smaller stuff? Now, I like the old British quote. The 4 causes of murder are, let's see, love, lust, liquor, and lucre. And it does help when you're trying to build stories, because you can kind of figure out what's pushing people into extremes if you look at it from those angles.
Yeah. So, so when you're writing stories, I'm sure a lot of it just sort of springs out of this vast trove of varied experience that you have. So let's talk about Coyote Song a little bit. Can you tell the discussants what it's about?
Coyote Song is more or less feeding on the stories that I've picked up along the way when I worked at crime scenes. Most of the characters in it are based on real people, and the major incidents are, except for the Cambodian Angel of Death, whom I have never met and do not want to. Stockton has a lot of refugee communities. Right after the Vietnam War, we landed about 40,000 Southeast Asians here. So we have Hmongs, we have Laotians, Vietnamese, and Cambodians. And all of them landed in pretty much the same straits. They didn't know the language. They didn't know how this whole society worked. A lot of them were boat people. The monks came right out of the Stone Age. So it was a huge adjustment period, and we're still not quite out of it. Although a lot of people have pretty well integrated now, the younger folks. So I wanted to talk about the things that happen with them, because a lot of that comes up in that first novel of mine too, Rough Magic.
Mm-hmm.
Except there I was using elves as the refugee community and mixing magic in for the fun of it, because, you know, if you're going to do forensics, why can't you imagine what else is going on?
Sure.
But one of the things we ran across with the Cambodians is a phenomenon called bang and gut. It's a sudden death syndrome. Young men, usually in their late 20s, early 30s, will wake up in the middle of the night and scream and fall over dead. And there's no marks on the body. So we would bring them into the morgue and try to do an autopsy, and all you'd find is, well, they had a belly full of rice. But these people all eat rice, so of course they have bellyfuls of rice.
Right.
We were thinking maybe it's some kind of weird ergotism that we just haven't identified before. Now they think it's genetic, that what's happening is you have a nightmare and it sets off tachycardia, and that causes a fatal heart attack.
Huh.
Because the story says that if you're visited once, you may survive it, but she'll come back again and get you the next time.
Huh.
But our biggest problem with it is that people would hide the bodies because they didn't want them cut up. A lot of different religions have restrictions about that.
Sure.
Jewish faith, Muslims, several others. They all don't want anything like that. No slicing and dicing of our relatives, thank you, no matter what happened.
Yeah.
And the minute you hide a body, it looks like a homicide to a Western cop.
Yeah.
So there was just endless friction, and we hadn't hired any Southeast Asians yet for the police department. It took a while to get that going, so we still didn't have any communication going within the community.
Right.
So in this case, it turns out the Cambodian angel of death is a real thing, and it's being used by a particular grandmother who found a way to kind of harness it and offer the angel shelter in herself in order to protect her family and get them through the whole boat people phase.
Wow.
But then they get here, and I've got a couple of characters who are also based on real people. But one of them comes out of Native American tradition, and the other comes out of voodoo from Mississippi.
Wow.
Okay.
So I wanted to see what would happen when three different traditions kind of clashed.
So, I'm writing notes over here, as I do, so I can be coherent later. I'll tell people what we talked about if they don't want to watch the whole video. But anyway, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the research that you did for the characters that you chose? Is it mostly out of your own personal experience? Did you do extra layers of things on particular characters or any of that?
Well, I did file the serial numbers off the people involved because I don't want to get sued for any reason. Don't embarrass anybody. One character, some elements of him are based on my old supervisor. He was an ex-Marine from Mississippi. So when he speaks with that drawl, that's pretty much what he sounded like. There are other aspects of him that are, you know, designed for the story and not really based on the person.
Sure.
The character is based on a Native American, but you know, my family has a lot of Indian heritage, but it doesn't really show in me. I look white. I was raised white.
Right.
Our nations are the Cherokee, the Sioux, the Oneida, and the Onondaga, from different parts of the family. This character is based on a local California tribe called the Miwoks, who are local to Stockton.
Okay.
I work with these folks a fair amount of the time at various archaeology sites, and because we're still trying to repatriate some bones and things from the collections at Sacramento State College.
Wow.
We've got the stuff that's been going for years, but one of the tribes, we have factions within the tribe fighting over what to do with them. So we end up having to hold them while they duke it out, and it's a process that's taking years.
Wow.
Anyway, We usually have Indian observers at archaeological sites these days because of the laws changing. So I went to a couple of these folks that I knew, and to one fellow that shows up at a lot of science fiction conventions. Do you know Greg Castro?
Yeah, I sure do.
So I asked a couple of folks to read it for me and just tell me if I was getting too far out of line, because this isn't my tradition. I'm fairly familiar with a lot of stuff to do with the four nations that are, but the new one, I'm an outsider.
Right.
So if I'm going to borrow that material, then I need to have it vetted by somebody who knows it a lot better than me.
Right.
So far it's working out. And of course, there's a follow-up story in the queue at F&SF that I'm really hoping will sell soon, but it takes a while.
Yeah. Well, it would be great to see that.
Well, we'll see. I have some more ideas in line because this town is really cosmopolitan. Everybody thinks it's just a backwoods Aggie town, but our last 911 survey said we had 125 languages and dialects spoken here.
Wow.
And we're apparently the third most cosmopolitan town in all of California, which just doesn't sound right somehow. But we have the oldest Sikh temple in the United States. So stuff has been going on here for a very long time.
Wow, that's interesting. And there's also been a recent influx of people coming from this area. I would say not super recent, but like when things were whenever people get priced out in the Bay Area, they start moving outwards into other zones. So
yeah, that can be a problem too, because we never seem to get the roads in shape for that. It just the roads get repaired 10 years after it's needed.
Yeah. So there's I'm having a hard time putting my finger on what I want to say, but there's a vibe about your stories that there's this sort of deep practicality to them, and I'm not sure if that's something that you strive for or just do automatically. But I think it's probably related to your combination of anthropology and forensics, where details and the concreteness are really important.
Well, we might go back to other things. I grew up with a mother who had cerebral palsy, so the practical side of life was always right there in front of us. Things had to be dealt with. You had to be flexible. You had to find ways around stuff. And when you do forensics, you have to adjust to whatever the scene is. I mean, one of the worst problems I ever had there was when I was supervised by a captain who thought he could apply time management to crime scenes. And I'm sorry, but they're completely unpredictable. You don't know if a burglary is going to be something you can do in 15 minutes or 6 hours.
Right.
So you just have to take your best efforts on some things and try to figure out what's going to actually work. And you start out with this idea that, you're going to do everything, but practically you can't. There have been nights when, I was the only CSI and I had 2 homicides and a couple of burglaries and a couple of, injury photos along the way in a single night.
Wow.
So there's no way that you can do everything. And even if you do, there's going to be a mistake made somewhere along the way.
Yeah.
The issue is that 95% of what you do at a crime scene never gets to court. It doesn't matter. The problem is that you can't tell which 5% is really going to count. So you still have to do it all, but you pray the mistake will be in the 95% that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And either way, you still have to be flexible because, you can wind up under a bridge doing a murder scene in soft dirt, and what the hell are you going to use? You got to do plaster footprints. And half your materials aren't there, and you can't get a hold of your partner to bring you what you need. So you wind up going to the local store and buying window screen and putting it in the plaster just so the damn thing will hold together. That kind of stuff. And of course, you still have to be able to defend it in court. So yeah, practicality is kind of the backbone of the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, absolutely.
Plus, whatever you're doing, everybody's judging it by the CSI standard. It's a problem in courts especially. Juries will expect you to do what they saw on TV, and nobody does, because so much of that is pure science fiction, and because no department is on the cutting edge. Everything you use has to have been proved and accepted in court already.
Yeah.
You can't even buy the new equipment until it's been beta tested by somebody else, because you can't spend that kind of money just on a whim.
Right.
So it's kind of fun to write science fiction about forensics, because I can make up imaginary situations where I don't have to deal with that. I can have the modern, new, edgy stuff, and I won't have to worry that it's going to take at least 3 years to get that through the court certification process. And then if it came from the FBI has kind of overreached on some things and given themselves a bad reputation, so you can have problems that are not related to what you did at all.
I heard about the FBI screw up with the hair analysis. Was it the hair analysis?
Yes, that's the most recent one.
Most recent one. That's the only one I've heard of. That's not.
There was another problem.
Your voice says there's many, many more.
Yeah, the FBI in action is kind of problematic for me. I tend to stay away from them if I can. It doesn't matter who does the work, they're going to claim the credit for it in the first place. And of course, if anything goes wrong, then it's the locals who screwed up. Problems with that, But there's some cool stuff that goes on too. So, one of the things I used to work on was fingerprint identification. And they have an office that does nothing but detached fingers and hands.
Cool.
Because when you can't get prints, you can remove them. Sometimes it's kind of grotty because, my coroner used to keep a pair of pruning shears for the purpose.
Yeah.
You put them in a glass of preservative, and then you would ship them to the FBI, and they have this office where they do all kinds of things like peeling layers of skin and using special dyes and taking pictures with special lighting through the skin so you can find the ridge detail no matter how damaged the skin is. Wow. And they handle about 300 cases a year. They're really good at that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Other things, the hair analysis, that one's probably not going to go too far because now we can actually do DNA on hair.
Yeah.
It used to be you had to have the roots, and you still had to have enough of the roots. We had one situation where we had a rape suspect, and the court order gave us the right to go in and collect a hair sample. Well, it's not from the hair on his head. And he wasn't going to have any part of that. So when he attacked the CSI in question, the bailiffs had to hold him down, and then one of them just reached down and grabbed a handful and ripped it out and handed it to her.
Ouch.
Is this enough?
Bet you got some hair roots that time.
Yes.
Police do not screw around.
These days, we can do the mitochondrial DNA because the mitochondrial DNA is all present through the shaft of the hair.
Yeah, yeah.
And all you need is a 1-inch length of it, and you can get enough for a match.
Huh.
Different DNA system because it uses the mitochondrial DNA, which is bacterial. It's in a ring, and it has a whole different set of matching sites that are not as variable as you'll find in nuclear DNA. But they can't be because mitochondria have to function no matter what. Or you're dead. You don't actually start breathing.
Right.
So these days, those cases are going to stop around 2000 because that's when we started getting really good DNA technology.
Yeah.
So the cases they're looking at are prior to 2000, and I doubt they're going to see that much. And in some of those cases, I think they will be able to go back and process for the DNA, and it will still turn out to have been a match, even if the microscopic stuff doesn't work out.
Right.
So I'm kind of waiting to see what the end result will be.
Well, it's interesting because when you think about the way that technology progresses and the kinds of things that we want to learn in a crime scene or in an archaeological scene, right? there have been several discussions over the course of the years, like, shouldn't we be leaving this site alone? Might we be damaging more evidence than we are gaining by using these techniques that we have right now? What we really need to have is we need to have more advanced, less invasive techniques so that we can learn more. And so there's always that balance between leaving alone and waiting for the technique to ripen and having to, I mean, with an archaeological dig it's a little easier because you don't have the, wow, somebody was murdered here. We got to figure out how to stop this person before they can kill anybody else. Or
it's not it's not usually time sensitive.
Quite as time sensitive, usually, right? Because you're not dealing with the mummy's curse or any of that.
Well, I hope not.
I hope not.
Foreign governments, on the other hand.
We do find lots of, traces of violence. We find arrowheads embedded in the bones. My master's thesis was about a period around 500 AD in the Bay Area where we had proto-Miwoks from the Central Valley moved that way and kind of pushed other people out. And then the Patwin tribe came down from the north with bows and arrows for the first time and pushed them back out. So you can see this whole period of warfare where all of a sudden there aren't any spearheads in people, there are arrowheads.
Mm.
And you see the whole change. In California it's a little harder than most areas because they didn't really have pueblos, they didn't have maize agriculture, they didn't have irrigation systems. They didn't really need to because they had plenty of resources as it was, so they didn't spend the energy on that.
Right.
But that makes some early paleontologists and anthropologists were looking at that and thinking, well, then nothing much happened here. But if you look at things like stylistic changes in the shell beads that people wore for decoration, or their tools, or the bird whistles that they used for making music, things like that, those do change over time.
Yeah.
And you can see periodic things like this episode where all of a sudden the whole war technology changed and went from one standard to another. You didn't have people throwing atlatls.
Yeah.
Not familiar with those? It's an extension of your hand that looks like a club, but what it does is hold the base of the spear and it makes your arm longer so you can throw the spear harder.
Mm-hmm.
And using that one changes your shoulder. So you can see that in skeletons. Philip Walker did that. And then when you change to bow and arrows, it does different things to your skeleton.
Right.
So you can see that too. Those are the kinds of things we look at.
Wow.
I spend a lot of time trying to figure out which tribe is which because sometimes you don't have any cultural stuff or the stuff is just so damaged. We find a lot of things with bulldozers. So my specialty is looking at skulls and figuring out how biologically distant they are from this tribe versus that tribe.
Wow.
Kind of arcane stuff, but nobody shoots at me. I like
This is a plus.
Yeah. I was in Kosovo for a while working for the International Criminal Tribunal, and you just were never sure at any one time, exactly who you were talking to because they could tell each other apart. But to me, an Albanian and a Serbian don't look very different.
Yeah.
And they don't really sound that different, and we were told not to learn the language because if you spoke the wrong one in the wrong place, you could be in trouble.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Even on simple things. Like the Serbian word for beer is pivo, but pivo is also a brand. And the pivo brand is Serbian, so if you walk into an Albanian market and ask for a pivo, they're not happy.
Right.
You have to ask for Union or one of the other brands, or I always went with Turkish beer because there you're safe.
Yeah.
It was really interesting for me, though, because it was the first time I had spent a long time in a Muslim country, and a lot of things are very different. For one thing, the minaret's going off at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Rise and shine.
Yeah, we weren't very far down the street, and then it was a war zone, so there were just odd aspects. The dogs all went feral when everybody had to run for it. And so there was this huge pack of wild dogs that would run through the entire town in the middle of the night for no apparent reason, barking and yapping like crazy. And you'd never know what the hell that was like, but it sounded like the wild hunt was going by.
Yeah.
And you had to be careful around them because they had had enough puppies in the meantime and gone feral that they were actually attacking some kids as they worked in the fields.
Wow.
So they were starting to shoot the dogs. And, you know, I'm very fond of dogs. The best vacation I had while I was there was a weekend when we went to Greece and we could hang out on the beach with normal beach bum dogs. Because they would crawl under your, you know, your beach chair with you, and you could feed them snacks, and they were just best buddies.
Yeah.
Wow.
A touch of normal life.
Well, it's the question of what's normal is always really, really interesting, isn't it? Something that I'm always asking when I'm, you know, coming up with something fictional, because it changes point of view. It changes all kinds of things, right? Because people don't typically notice the stuff that's normal. And so you have to figure out what's normal to this particular character, right? Yeah, it's an interesting question.
We used to run into stuff with just medical treatments. Cambodians in particular, but several other groups too, will use medical treatments on their kids when they catch the flu. One of them involves putting little cups on the back and heating them so that they suck.
Right.
And they make a kind of a hickey, and it looks like child abuse to a Western doctor when they're just doing something that's very traditional.
Yeah.
So we've had some problems with that too, trying to get people to understand that, no, you probably should take them to a doctor and actually get antibiotics if they're really down with bronchitis.
Right, right.
Instead of trying to suck it out through the skin, because it's probably not going to work.
Right, exactly.
This reminds me of a related story. It's actually not having to do with child abuse, but with cultural conventional wisdom that doesn't hold, like the cupping isn't an effective treatment for an infection.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's Vietnamese in this area. I don't know if you can see out my window, but there's lots of forest out there,
Mm-hmm.
and lots of mushrooms. And apparently a poisonous mushroom in this area very closely resembles a delicacy from Vietnam. And traditional for the families to go out mushroom gathering, so they go out mushroom gathering, and they pick these mushrooms thinking what prize we have, and they end up in the ER.
Oof. Mushroom poisoning's nasty.
Yeah, if you pick up Amanita, it'll kill your liver, and the only cure is a transplant.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
So apparently in Italy, I do not know this of my own, but I have been told, the pharmacists are trained in mycology, and people will go out and gather mushrooms, and then they will bring the basket full of mushrooms to their pharmacist, to their apothecary, who will sort through, take out all the ones that are going to make them sick, and give the rest of them back, which I think is an excellent solution to the problem. I don't eat mushrooms that I gather. I don't eat mushrooms from the grocery store. I like my liver, thank you.
Yeah. That's generally a thing that one wants to keep, right?
It's called a liver for a reason. You don't live without it.
Yeah.
My grandmother is part Cherokee, so we used to do some wild foraging. It was more a matter of berries than anything else, but sometimes we picked up morels, and we were always very careful about mushrooms. You just don't want to make any mistakes.
But morels don't look like any poisonous variety, do they?
No, they don't. So there's no confusion involved.
That's why you picked up the morels.
Yes.
It was, I'm taking 5 kids out with me mushroom hunting. Let's pick the easy ones.
Yep.
Like picking up camas roots. They're a kind of wild lily, but there's a couple of kinds, and you can't really tell them apart for sure unless they're flowering.
Mm-hmm.
One of them will kill you, and the other one won't. So it's kind of a big thing.
There was a survivalist up here a number of years ago who was, and I'm trying, and I don't remember what the 2 species were, but he was convinced that he was consuming one species, and then eventually it killed him. And so when they found him and did the analysis later on, it turned out he'd been consuming another mildly hallucinogenic species that had eventually killed him, but they were visually very closely related. I'm trying to remember.
Was that the story of the guy who was living in the wilds up in the north?
Yeah, I think.
And he kind of wandered off and, like went walkabout. Nobody knew where he was, and then finally he ended up dying in a bus somewhere.
Yeah, in the VW bus, they found him.
Yeah, because I remember that story coming out in the news, and I remember them talking about these two varieties of plant.
Right.
And that this one variety was just not going to nourish you.
Yeah.
Even though it was going to fill your stomach,
we had a case here where we had Mexicans coming up who crossed the border illegally, and they had gathered up some of the wild camas and ate it for dinner, and it killed all 3 of them. It can happen to a lot of people for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, part of the reason why our diets are so diverse is that people have been taking it for the team during starvation periods, and some people are dying, but they're discovering, hey, this one didn't kill me. I'll eat it. And I mean, the number of different varieties of things that people eat throughout the world is quite astonishing.
Well, and the number of things that are that you can eat that are borderline poisonous, that it's all about quantity or it's all about technique, right? I mean, whoever looked at a lobster and said, "Hey, I bet that tastes good," was probably having a really bad day at the time.
Yeah, well, I'm going to have to eat something or I will die. So I'm going to take on the thing with the claws and see if I can win.
With red tide, you can never be quite sure about shellfish along the coast anyway.
Yeah, true.
Safe at one time of year may not be another.
Yep.
Some plants, too, may not be poisonous. We have horsetail ferns that grow around here because this is on the edge of the delta. The San Francisco, Sacramento River, that whole area. It's like 1,100 square miles of waterways. So we get a lot of these horsetail ferns, and you can eat them when they're young, when they're shoots. But then they develop these glassy photoliths that are basically a defense against grazing. And then if you try to eat them after they've got those things in them, you get indigestion really bad.
Yeah.
But they have other uses.
Because you're grazing.
Yeah, we are. But these are also the things that are known as scouring rushes because the 49ers used them to scour out their fry pans. Those same photoliths are what turned them into a decent scrub patch.
Yeah.
If it has a use, we're going to figure it out.
Yeah, we used to have a lot better rules for figuring it out. Folks who forage regularly usually have a whole testing system worked out. You try small amounts and you wait so long before you try any more. Things like that. And of course, there's the kind of the basic rules. With berries, it's like, if it's blue or black, you're probably safe. If it's red, 50-50. If it's white, don't eat it.
Yeah.
And if it's speckled brown beans, forget it. You don't want to write them. But we have people who make those mistakes because people come here from everywhere, and in the spring they drop off the trains like fleas because we're a big railroad junction.
Yeah.
We have people trying stuff or catching fish out by the old Superfund site where the creosote plant was, things like that.
Yeah.
Some of those look like crime scenes, and you have to try and sort out what's an accident, what's deliberate, what was just ignorance, or sometimes it's suicidal. People do strange things. One of the things we have a problem with here is that people get hit by the trains. And some of them do it on purpose.
Right.
I worked on one case where this lady was on the tracks, and the engineer was blowing his horn like crazy, but it takes a mile to stop the average train.
Yeah.
She was doing the Vogue, watching him come at her. It was kind of nuts.
Yeah. Well, forensically, that's got to be a nightmare.
Well, yeah. I've been out on a few expeditions looking for parts. Those trains are brutal.
Yeah.
Dang. Yeah.
The other thing is we have kids playing chicken with the trains. You know, sometimes they really screw up, and sometimes they just get bumped. But you have to go out and do the same full-scale search either way if somebody reports a collision.
Mm-hmm.
And you're always afraid of what you're going to find.
Yeah.
Coyote Song is hopefully the first of a series of stories. I'm going to look at some other magic systems too and see how that turns out.
So you're sort of mixing them together through the interaction of the characters?
Yes.
Cool.
I have the supervisor with the tradition of Voodoo, and I have the CSI who's using Native American points of view. And then they're going to encounter various other groups. The first one is this Cambodian thing with the Angel of Death. The second one is a Filipino tradition of magic done with insects.
Ooh.
The third one will be Santeria, which is pretty common around here. And then the fourth one, I'm not sure yet. There's this whole Thai tradition of golden Buddha babies that might be interesting.
Huh.
They take a baby that's lost to miscarriage or something similar, and it's mummified through this process and then coated with gold and used to do magic. Very strange.
Wow.
Yeah, kind of that reaction too. But some of these are fairly benign. I'm curious about them, and it gives me an excuse to go out and poke around and then to bring up stuff that I ran across by accident when I was doing crime scenes. Because you run across Santeria a lot. You'll see people in the back of the courtroom throwing powder. They're trying to invoke the assistance of the Orisha Ogun, who's kind of an engineer type and semi-autistic as far as I can see. So I'm not quite sure why he's supposed to help you out with the law, but he's the one they appeal to.
He must be the rulesy one.
Yeah, I think kind of very black and white views about many things. Kind of famous for not having it all together when he deals with females. That's why I look at him and I think of my grandson who has Asperger's, and it's like, that looks familiar.
Oh, that's interesting.
Do you find the different magic systems clashing? I'm thinking in terms of martial arts, for example. Jiu-jitsu may not work against taekwondo, and certain types of kickboxing are a total train wreck against certain types of karate. So I'm wondering if you're finding that kind of conflict as you're working your way through the different the different magic systems. Are there places where they deliberately just don't work together that you're writing around, or do they all sort of work around each other?
Well, they're all based on human nature, so they all have some basic similarities. We all work kind of on the same system as far as the way our thought processes work. So what you're dealing with is the cultural layers on top of that. And some of them do clash, and some of them can be dangerous, literally, because Santeria uses herbs a lot. And that thing we mentioned about foods that can get you, herbs definitely can. So, that has a very practical side to it that may have nothing to do with your religious views or what you think about the Orishas. Santeria in general is more about keeping yourself in harmony with the natural forces of the universe than it is anything else. I mean, they will tell you that the Polero Mayombe types, those guys want to take control, but they all admit, even the Poleros, that you can only take control for a short time and then it will turn around and eat you. Which is why the Santeros say don't even get into that. Your idea is that you maintain balance, and if something goes wrong, you have to adjust the balance. So everybody gets kind of batshit about the animal sacrifices sometimes, but that's what those sacrifices are intended to do, to reestablish the balance or to maintain the balance, and then 90% of the time you have whatever you sacrificed for lunch. So it's not like you're being deliberately cruel to the animal.
Yeah, sure. It's
only a subset who do the curses. We had one case where, we had a guy who went absolutely nuts because someone had nailed a black chicken to his porch with multicolored threads and a little packet tied to it. That's a Santeria curse. And he wanted that gone. Big time.
Yeah.
So the cops who were out there agreed to take it, but they didn't want to deal with it. One of the things when you're booking evidence is you cannot book things that are perishable or which may injure the property clerk. So there's a whole list of stuff that you just can't book without getting special permission and putting it in the freezer or something like that. So they were not going to take this black chicken back to the police department. They had it in a paper bag, and when they got to the crosstown freeway where the interchange is, they flung it out in the bushes and just didn't report that part. And I heard about it, the next day when we're all sitting around in the courthouse waiting to testify on something or other, and I started laughing, and they're going, what? And I'm saying, that was exactly what you're supposed to do with those things. You throw them in the river or you leave them at the crossroads so it can't find its way back again.
Those cops are never going to forget that you said that. They're going to do that from now on.
How do you know that? Why do you know that? So then I have to kind of throw my hands up and say, I'm a CSI. I'm a geek. That's what we are, okay? Get over it.
We know things, right?
Oh, yeah, geeks. It's a different personality set. What you see on TV is like, no, you don't want to give the CSIs guns. You don't want them going to bombs scenes at all. You just don't want them being the first in anywhere. You don't want them interviewing suspects. These are the guys who will just break their backs to get the perfect fingerprint. They'll get fingernail print dust, up their noses. They'll be out there in the hot sun all day long, whatever it takes to get that one perfect little piece of evidence. And they're going to have some weird hobby on the side. In my lab, I was the one who wrote science fiction. We had another guy who carved marionettes by hand and painted them. We had a gal who was a specialized seamstress for the rodeo clothes. She would make all these silk outfits for the riders at the Clements Rodeo. Things like that. Everybody had one of those hobbies on the side. And not one of us carried a gun that we ever admitted to, because we weren't supposed to. And none of us wanted to be the guy to take down a suspect. It's just a whole different mindset. Cops pounce. So you need a fairly aggressive kind of personality in the first place. And you get side effects with that, which is why we're having some problems now. We've always had some problems with that because these are the guys who basically come up from dysfunctional families as the eldest children. And they're raised up as the caretaker, the guy who keeps the family running in spite of mom and dad being drunks. And they will always have a next younger brother or sister who's always in trouble with the law or got pregnant as a teenager, stuff like that. And it's always that oldest kid who winds up having to fix things, maintain things, keep the family going. So they go out and find a job where they do the same thing. And then, of course, they marry someone who is extremely needy and needs a lot of care. And it all gets to be too much, and they divorce him. And that's why you have this huge divorce rate for the first marriages of cops. Anyway, this is my private theory about cops. 2 marriages at least, and sometimes 3, before they figure this out for themselves. And it takes 5 years on the job before they mellow out and stop being such hot dogs and thinking they can make the whole world run right if people will just accept their authority.
Wow. Well, there's a lot there to work with in fiction, I'll tell you. So it makes sense.
Yeah, I'm trying to translate some of that into alien terms too. I have a work in progress that involves a human detective partnered with an alien, and trying to make the two of them mesh when they see things very differently.
Cool. Well, we are at the end of our hour. Pat, thank you. That was fascinating, as I expected, and we will look forward to hearing about whether we'll be seeing the sequel to Coyote Song coming out before too long. So we'll keep our eyes out for that. Yeah, let's see. Next week, any suggestions? I'm going to be coming back on Sunday from the Nebulas, so that Pat and I are going to go hang there together. And so I think I should be up for a hangout. Do you guys have a particular topic that you'd like to talk about?
Award systems in alien races?
Award
Since you're going to the Nebulas?
Go, Kimberly. Sure. Sure, but I'm going to mull that over, and I'm going to see if I can come up with a way of making it a little less on the nose.
It's kind of crass, but how about bathrooms?
Bathrooms?
It's not a bad one.
A lot of different
bathrooms sounds great.
There's got to be a lot of different problems to deal with.
I think bathrooms would be great. So, give me a rain check on the awards system. Well,
maybe wait till after the Hugos for that one.
Yeah, we'll wait till things settle down a little bit before we do that one. But so let's.
You may come up with all kinds of ideas at the Nebula weekend. So take notes.
That's true. But let's plan on doing bathrooms for now, and if I can always write things down at the Nebula weekend and kind of dole them out a little bit at a time. Do you guys want to move the timing of the hangout to a different time, or are you good with the 10 o'clock time?
I am. For me, it's not so much the time; it's the day. Wednesday's half day for my kids, so my Wednesdays are a bit train wrecky.
Okay, I hear you. So, why don't I not take up the extra time for people who are watching? But so we'll see you next week to talk about bathrooms. And for now, I'm going to stop the broadcast, and we can discuss other things when the broadcast is done. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Pat. Fascinating discussion.